The last few days I've been trying to optimize my rendering pipeline by instancing meshes. And instancing meshes means sharing same vertex data for multiple meshes, which is the instanced meshes, and which would reduce draw calls. For instance, if you had 10,000 coins inside the world, you'd have to call 10,000 draw calls, but with instancing meshes, you'd have to only call once. So just to optimize and reducing CPU overhead and let GPU does the repetition. So first of all, the way I initialize meshes has changed. So for instance, this is to initialize water. I have this instance CPU struct, which has a position scale color. Looks like this. I don't rotate water, food, and dollars, so that doesn't have rotation variable, and I do that for a number each meshes, so 10 times for water. And the mesh class contains CPU instances, so I stored this struct 10 times, and after that I call this function to create buffers using vertex buffer. I still have to call this init function to initialize index buffer. So if this function had included for creating index buffer, I think I don't need to call this function anymore. Anyways, before instancing meshes, I had to call or create buffers for each of these 10 times for the water. But as you can see, I only create buffer once, and because each instances of water share same vertex buffer. And I've got this the scene class has this instances. The scene class has arrays for non-instanced meshes and instanced meshes. So whenever I initialize meshes or instanced meshes, I store inside this array. So the water mesh, dollar bill, and food mesh gets stored inside. So this contains 3 instanced meshes, and each contains some amount of instanced CPUs and instances as CPU. Inside this CPU instances array. So this was inside the load function, and after this function gets called, I always call this reset function before training starts, and most of the time I recompute the position, because whenever training starts, water, food, dollar bills gets respawned in random positions on each new episode. And to do that, I remove past positions and generate new positions to avoid overlapping. But now I've started using instanced meshes. Things get the way I do it has slightly changed. So not only retrieving meshes, I only retrieve instanced meshes now from the scene, and I use that to retrieve each instanced meshes. I've got three instanced meshes like I mentioned, and this is just for indexing 0, 1, 2, and use this to retrieve each instances inside this mesh. So remember, the mesh class contains, the scene class contains this instanced meshes, which are just mesh class, which contains instances. So yeah, and retrieve each instance and retrieve position and remove past position and regenerate new position and assign to a position of instance. So this is, by doing this, I changed position of new position for each instance, and every time I recompute positions, I make this instances dirty true, and the reason is if this is true, I recompute word matrix using newly assigned position, and which looks like this, where I recompute word matrix using the new position which were recomputed. I don't rotate, so I only use scaling and translation to recompute the word matrix. And after this has done, I copy to GPU data, which looks like this, contains full word matrix, full world, as in so this is like word matrix and also color. So yeah, recompute word matrix and copy to this struct, and later and after that this function gets called where mapping this function map retrieve some region from GPU, some region of memory from GPU, and write these data down to GPU and give it back that region so that GPU recontrol that region. So I make it, whenever position changes, I make it dirty so that I recompute word matrix and write down that data to GPU. And the same goes for whenever collisions happen. I remove the past position and regenerate new random position and reassign to this value and make it dirty, and then that process that I just mentioned happens. So yeah, and also I used to, whenever I change position, or mostly position, whenever I set new position, I recompute word matrix and recompute the bounding box using this function. But it seems like I thought I need to store a bounding box inside this struct, but it seems like that's not really common, and more common way is to recompute the bounding box on site whenever it needs. So I created this helper function, and these equation exactly do what this function does. this function and these equations are equivalent. Like I said, I don't rotate my water and food, so I just needed to scale, multiply by scale and add position, and that's exactly what this function does. And also my equations was slightly broken because I was not initializing bounding box whenever meshes gets initialized. So I now initialize bounding box to these values, minimum and maximum value. I didn't have to do that previously because this function had these values because it uses this so previously I didn't need to have to initialize like this because it uses this. So without initializing bounding box, whenever I compute bounding box here, these values would be like garbage, and things get messy, and it would eventually break my code. And so yeah, and also the way I prepare shader and vertex shader has changed. So I used to use this vertex shader where I only have slot where I only had position as input, and this corresponds to slot 0. But for the instanced meshes vertex shader, not only I need to prepare position, but also these word matrix and color, and this corresponds to slot 1, and this position corresponds to slot 0, and I think this is the slot numbers. So yeah, these has to also match to to make things work. And finally, whenever I render function, so I showed you, so I showed you whenever instances are dirty, I have to recompute word matrix and write down to GPU. So that would be done by this function called sync GPU, which gets called right before rendering functions get called. And yeah, and inside the render function it looks like this, where for the non-instanced meshes like agent floor, agent's eye, mouth, I have this like I used to do. And so now I have to separate. So to render function I have to, I pass this scene class, and from the scene class I retrieve the meshes and also instanced meshes. So I used to loop through these meshes, but now I have both non-instanced and instanced meshes. I have to loop twice, and yeah, and this is to render instanced meshes. So, and this render instanced function looks like this. So this is to render non-instanced meshes, but this is to render instanced meshes, and I was quite surprised that DirectX really supports instanced meshes. Call. So this is provided by DirectX, and it literally has name instanced. So yeah, I think it's pretty. It really signifies that this instancing meshes method is pretty famous. So yeah, I guess this is how I did instancing meshes. I don't have 1,000 or 10,000 cubes yet, but I'm planning to have more water and food, I guess. So that's why I've worked on instancing meshes, and yeah, I guess this is it. And yeah, thanks.